We are continuing with our expressions unit today. We're talking about factoring expressions. Factoring an expression is really like doing the opposite of the distributive property, which we just learned recently. So when we distribute, we take something on the outside and we multiply it by everything on the inside. When we factor, we are pulling out a factor. So we are thinking of a number that both variables or terms or whatever's in there can be divided by. So sometimes there's going to be multiple ways to factor an expression, but you're always going to try and factor it completely. Whenever you're factoring something on a homework assignment or class assignment, you want to factor it completely. That means you want to find the biggest or the most things that you can divide all of your terms by, or the most things you can pull out from that expression. So in my example, the original expression I would give you is negative 40x plus 8. The biggest factor that you can pull out from both 40x and 8 is the factor of 8. That means we're going to divide by 8. So the factor that I'm pulling out goes on the outside of our parentheses. And on the inside is what's left over after we divide. So negative 40x divided by 8 gives me 5x. And positive 8 divided by 8 gives me a positive 1, or the plus 1. So we're going to practice this a couple times below. Our first expression there is 55x plus 33. We're going to try and think of things that we can pull out or divide both of those terms by. So I have 55x and I have 33. I'm thinking about numbers that they are both divisible by, and the first number that comes to my mind is 11, and that happens to actually be the only term they have in common. So that's the factor that I'm going to pull out, is 11. When I pull out the 11, that's what goes on the outside of my parentheses, and on the inside is what I get when I actually divide. So I'm going to go back to 55x and divide by 11. So I'll take 55x and divide by 11, and that's going to give me a positive 5x. That's the first thing I'm going to write in my parentheses. And I have a positive 33 or a plus 33. 33 divided by 11 is going to give me a positive 3. Since it's a positive, I will write a plus sign and then the number 3 and close my parentheses. This is now my factored expression. It looks a lot like what we would initially, or what we previously learned, would have to distribute with, but like I said, we're working backwards. So in the one below, we've got negative 12y plus 100. I want to think of, again, the biggest factor, the most things I can pull out. So the first thing I notice is they're both even numbers. That means I could divide by 2, but that's not actually going to be the biggest factor I can pull out. So when I'm thinking about what I can divide by, I want to think about the factors of 12, let's say. 1 and 12, I can't divide 100 by 12. I have 2 and 6. We already talked about 2, but there's something bigger. I cannot divide 100 by 6 evenly. And then I've got 3 and 4. 100 is also divisible by 4, so that is the biggest factor they both have in common. I'm going to divide both of them by 4. Since I am pulling the 4 out, the 4 is going to go on the outside of the parentheses. And then I'm going to actually divide to get the inside value. So that's a negative 12y divided by 4. Well, negative 12 divided by 4 gives me negative 3, and then I have the y term. So on my inside of my parentheses, I'm going to put negative 3y. And that's a positive or a plus 100. So when I take a positive 100 and divide by 4, I get a positive 25. Since it is a positive 25, I'm going to write plus 25 and close my parentheses. That is now my factored expression. Moving on to the third one, I have 24m minus 16. Again, I'm trying to think of the biggest factor they have in common. So they do have 2 in common. They have 4 in common. But even bigger than that, the biggest factor I can divide them both by is 8. That's the number I'm going to pull out. 8 will go on the outside of my parentheses, and on the inside I divide. 24m divided by 8 gives me a positive 3m. So I'm going to write that inside the parentheses. And then I have a minus 16 or a negative 16. Remember, we're always including that sign in front of the number. So I'm going to think of that as a negative 16 divided by 8, which gives me a negative 2. I am literally going to write negative 2 inside the parentheses. I know that looks like a minus. It is essentially the same thing. We are keeping that negative sign with the number. Scrolling up to do the last couple. We're going to be taking out possibly more than just a number here. So I've got 14W plus 6W. Focusing on the numbers, I'm thinking about they're both even, so I have a 2 in common. Other factors of 6, let's say, would be 3 or 6. 14 is not divisible by 3 or 6, so the biggest number I can pull out is 2. Now, this is the first one where they have more than just a number in common. They also both have a W, and I can pull that out as well. Since I'm pulling the 2W out, it's going to go on the outside of the parentheses, and on the inside I divide. 14W divided by 2W. Well, 14 divided by 2 is 7, and the W's cancel out, leaving me with just 7. 6W divided by 2W will give me 3, and the W's cancel out, or W divided by W gives me just 1, which is why I don't write it. And again, this is a positive, so I'm going to write a plus sign, 3. This is my new factored expression for this one. Moving on to my last 2 examples, I have negative 2x squared minus 10x. Looking at these numbers, 2 is my smallest number, so I'm going to start there. The only numbers that 2 is divisible by is 2. So I know I'm going to pull out a factor of 2. 10 is also divisible by 2. And the other thing they both have in common is an x. So I'm going to pull out the x as well. So I'm going to put a 2x on the outside of my parentheses, since that's what I'm pulling out. And then I'm going to actually divide. So I have a negative 2x squared divided by 2x. Well, negative 2 divided by positive 2 gives me negative 1. And x squared divided by x. Basically, if I have x squared divided by x, I'm going to take one of the x's away, which means I only have 1 left over. So it's giving me a negative 1x on the inside. Again, just like above, when I only had 1 W for each, if I took it out, it was gone. However, with this term, the negative 2x squared, I have 2 x's, and I'm only taking one of them out, so there's still 1 left over in this part of my answer. Then I've got that minus 10x, or when I include it, it's going to be like a negative 10x divided by 2x. Well, negative 10 divided by positive 2 is negative 5. And here I only have 1x, so if I'm pulling it outside of the parentheses, I don't have any left over. So when I write this answer on the other side, I'm going to be writing just a negative or a minus 5. My factored expression is negative 2x, parentheses, negative 1x minus 5. Lastly, I have negative 15g plus 3 minus 30d. I've got 3 terms there, so I've got to find something that I can divide all 3 of them by. I'm going to look at my smallest term, which is 3, and I think about the factors of 3. 3 is only divisible by 1 and itself, and 15 is also divisible by 3, and 30 is divisible by 3, so that's the factor I'm going to pull out. When I look at my other terms, my 15 has a G, but none of the others do. My 30 has a D, but none of the others do. So that means the only thing they all have in common is a factor of 3. That's the only thing I pull out on this problem. I am going to go through with my division. So I'm going to start with my negative 15G divided by 3. Negative 15 divided by positive 3 is negative 5. And I still have the G there. I did not pull any out this time. So I'm going to write negative 5G inside the parentheses. I have a positive 3 divided by a positive 3. 3 divided by 3 is a positive 1. Since it's a positive, I'm going to put plus 1. And my last term is a minus 30d, or a negative 30d. And I can divide that by positive 3 as well. Negative 30 divided by positive 3 is negative 10. And again, I'm not pulling a variable out, so the d stays with that term. So I'm literally going to write a negative 10d or a minus 10d, and that is my new factored expression. The key with factoring expression is finding the biggest thing that you can divide them by. And if they have any letters in common, you're going to pull those out as well. Make sure you check these in with your teacher and ask any questions if you have them.